My name's Paula Byrne, and I'm excited to be here with my partner and colleague, Sherry Johnson. And this is Leadership in Action, which is 15 minutes that we do every Thursday at this time from 9 to 9:15. And it's really around talking about some sort of key leadership topics. And our structure is we sort of propose a question or a challenge. We talk about some of the challenges that people have in relation to that. And then we talk about what are some sort of tips or frameworks that people can take forward to address that challenge. So today we're talking about decision fatigue and how to lead when you're overwhelmed. And so just kind of, if you can imagine your plate is overflowing, you have too many decisions, too much pressure, and instead of moving forward, you're stuck second guessing or overanalyzing, and sometimes you can just feel very burnt out or very stressed. So Sherry, does that sound familiar? And I know we're not alone in this. And why do you think people sort of get into, decision fatigue?
Well, it just the idea that I think people feel the fatigue without knowing where it's coming from. And I think it's that constantly you get caught up in there's so much to do. I can never do it all. There's only one me. We were just talking about what if, everybody, if only I had more time, I wish I could be three places at once. So that's a very real feeling. But oftentimes we're not aware that we might be falling into treating everything like it's urgent and treating everything that's urgent that it's important. And when we start to have in our head, like, I have to do so much, this is all on me. That's an opportunity to kind of take a step back and think, wow, no wonder I'm fatigued, but maybe I need to do something. Maybe there's a different way to approach this.
When you talk about people sort of almost like an automatic pilot,
Mm-hmm.
and so how do, what would be like what would be sort of a sign to say, hey, maybe you are overstressed, or you are on automatic pilot, or you are just sort of running faster on the hamster wheel? What might be a
Well,
sign?
some of the signs that we've talked about that have come up from other leaders that we kind of share in our workshops is if you recognize your people are kind of always kind of coming overly prepared, right? They're always kind of going overboard. There might be something in there that's unclear. And so you're creating a lot of extra work for them. Or a sign is you're not even aware that you're always saying yes. You don't have any way to kind of discern how to set boundaries, how to be able to talk about your capacity, how to be able to talk about priorities. Another sign people talk about is if they're quiet for a minute, they can think a lot of it might be their feeling of, it might be a confidence where they're just trying to keep themselves busy because they don't want to stop and say, like, I really don't know what I'm doing. And it's easy. And then that's sort of like just recognizing that and saying, okay, let me just kind of catch up with myself here. Because what's
Yeah.
interesting, Paul,
Go ahead.
is
Yes, sorry.
because if you're feeling that as a leader, like if you're kind of feeling like I don't have a lot of time and you keep everything, you have so much to do and you keep taking on more and more and more, of course it's impacting the people on your team.
Yeah, and we know, like, from both research and even working with leaders, that it has a huge impact if people are not clear around decisions, or things are not moving forward, but especially clarity. It really can impact the overall perception of leadership effectiveness. And in some of the assessments we do, there's a very, very strong correlation between decision making and perceived leadership effect.
Well, and even what I've been looking at more recently is with this kind of crisis, if you will, of employee engagement and continuing erosion of trust, not only in the community and the world, but within organizations. Business leaders have an opportunity to build trust, unlike anything people can feel outside of work. But when people start to wonder, like, how is my leader making decisions? Are they just shooting from the hip? are they making a decision? Are they just saying yes to everything? Are they ever kind of pushing back and protecting my time? That how you make a decision says a lot about your reputation as a leader, and if people are going to trust you and really want to follow you wholeheartedly.
So it sounds like, so the traditional thing of trust is almost broader because it's not around like, do I trust you as a person, but it can
Mhm.
be, do I trust you to make the right decisions, right?
And how are you making those
And how
decisions
are you
becomes very
making those
important,
decisions?
because the other thing we know is like we're facing things we've never dealt with before. So oftentimes not a right decision. Why are we chasing that? Why do we think like I have to make the best decision? It's like you don't know. And you're going to make a decision and you're going to see how it works out and you're going to move on. But a lot of times team members are looking to see, how are you making a decision? Are you just about profit and pushing forward, which of course people want to win and be successful, but are you also taking into account the impact on the people and the teams? And so that's why it's so important to be able to if somebody asked you, well, how'd you make that decision? Or why are we doing this? Or why is everything so important for to be able to explain and be transparent about, well, this is what we're doing and here's why it matters.
Yeah, and some of the common challenges that we sort of see is that people may overanalyze minor decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they may fail also to delegate the authority of some of those decisions or clarity. We often hear a lot about governance models and people being clear about who has responsibility for a decision or who needs to be informed and stuff like that. And then, this kind of confusing sort of busyness with effectiveness, which I know you have a lot of passion around what we call this false sense of urgency. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
you can talk a little bit more about that.
Well, the thing to remember is that people say I have to move fast, and so that is a good goal. Like you want people to move quickly, being first, being ready, being agile. That's all really valuable. But the challenge is it's how do you know when it's a true sense of urgency and not just false busyness? And people are not going to be able to sustain that, first of all. And a lot of times it might be you don't realize the impact you're having on your team, and that's creating your fingerprints all over that false sense of urgency. People may not be clear, like, did we decide to do this or are we doing this? So they're just busy doing everything. And they're you would keep piling things more on without reprioritizing. So a false sense of urgency can make us feel like we're getting a lot done, but the challenge is that we're perhaps not getting the things that are really getting us the results that we want. And in the meantime, people are starting to kind of feel like I can't keep this up. Like how much
Right.
more do you want from me?
So it kind of feels like busyness, but we're not moving forward kind of thing.
Right. It's like
Yeah.
going nowhere fast.
Yeah.
It's like,
So let's sort of step back and how do people get out of this? Like, what are some of the tips or frameworks that can help people sort of see this maybe differently?
yeah. Well, the first thing is always with awareness and recognizing the signs. And so the signs might be, again, your people are just overworking all the time, talking about how I'm so crazy busy. It's almost like a badge of honor, like many of us do. And and what are we recognizing? Are we recognizing fire drills, or are we recognizing people being more strategic in their approach? So what are we paying attention to and how are we trying to get everything done? So recognizing the signs is first, and then checking in with yourself about maybe there's something about me that's driving this. I I'm trying to prove myself versus really improve the team. I'm trying to push things forward when I should be spending more time just getting clarity and getting people aligned and helping them move forward. I feel like I have to do it all versus saying, wait a minute, that's a different mindset. But then once that awareness happens, then the question is what might be some frameworks or models that could be really helpful?
Yeah, I think we kind of talk about, not just the decision, but how do you actually make the decision?
Hmm.
You know, and so let's talk a little bit about what would be a framework that would help people think about how they're making decisions. And I know there's many, many different decision-making models, but we won't be able to go into all of them. But maybe we can talk about one that can help people sort of structure those.
Well, the funny thing was, people think about decision making, and there's always the rational decision making model, which is basically define the problem, explore how you want to solve the problem, and then decide.
Right.
And when you put that model up, everybody goes, yes, yes, very rational. And yet when you say, well, how much time do you spend on each of these steps? And many people are just like, they can remember, especially if it's not just themselves making the decision, if they know it's important to get the buy-in and commitment of the team, they might have just jumped in and started to brainstorm something, and they haven't stopped and talked about what is actually the problem.
Right.
What is it we're actually trying to solve? And then moving backwards up that chain can often be very helpful. Just kind of like, what is the problem we wanted to solve? Why is it important? How does it matter? How do we know if it's improved? And
Yeah,
then
one of
making
the
sure
things,
whatever
yeah,
you decide to do, you can connect back to that.
one of the things I think is can be really helpful if people kind of like think about sometimes decision making in just a small 2x2 matrix, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's important versus what is urgent. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
there's a confusion between what's urgent and what's important. So if you have sort of decision making and you literally were to map what's urgent versus important, just as even a
Yeah,
particular step.
the
And then there's the,
classic. And I think there's the people call it the Eisenhower matrix, right?
yeah,
And what happens is it's natural that things that are urgent suddenly feel like they're important. But then the important things that aren't urgent fall off. Why do people cancel going to training? Why do people say, "Oh, I'm going to exercise next week"? Because it's not urgent. But that's the kind of the false business that we fall into. And so one of the tools that was really, really popular that we introduced was the just two things, right? So you're like, if you're constantly not just saying, quarterly or annually, these are our priorities, but every conversation is an opportunity to reinforce what's most important. And so you talk about what are the top two things we have to work on.
not that are just urgent, but are important.
Yes. And so yeah, when you say top two things, you're able to make a link to this is why. These are the most important projects. This is how we add value to the business. This is what we have to do for us to be successful. And so you start to be able to make that space to create that time for those important things that if you worked on them might help some of the feeling of being
And then I think
overwhelmed.
there's sort of two things is kind of what decisions can I make alone versus what decisions do I need to engage others, you know? And one of the things is sometimes if a decision is very urgent and you don't have a lot of time, you may
Mhm.
have to make that decision
And it might
alone, right?
make sense. And you know what, I was cracking up, in intuitive decision making, going with your gut, going with your heart, whatever body part you like, it's your intuition. It's actually a decision making model. And
Right.
it can work if you have a lot of expertise, if you can see the patterns. There's a reason why people can kind of make good decisions in the moment individually, as a leader. On the other hand, when there's a decision where the quality is really important and you need commitment from people, when is it important for you to explore options with other people and then make it very clear about how you're going to go about that? And there's simple little tools sometimes you can use when you're facilitating. One of my favorites is what's good enough. Like what can get us moving and we can start to do something and then come back and improve it. That helps me sometimes stop procrastinating and just like what's good enough and then get moving and then start to adapt as you go.
I think one thing that you pointed on that I think we just want to emphasize. If your decision is going to require other people's commitment to it,
Mhm.
that's when you need to get other people's input because,
Mhm.
as I always say, you'll pay now or pay later.
Right.
Because if you don't engage them and you need their buy-in for the particular decision, well, then when you roll it out, it's not going to get rolled out well. So I
And then
think
how much
thinking
time,
about
yeah, how much time does it take to then go back and try to repair
yeah,
people asking
urgency,
like, what are we
importance.
doing?
Yeah, and so a couple of things because we've only a minute or so left. So, one of the things, if it's urgent, you can act and do it, right?
Mhm.
There are
Mhm.
times where you delegate or you engage other people, especially if you need their participation in the
Mhm.
output of that decision. And then some of those things that are not urgent, think whether they can be deferred and sort of push it back, you know? And so one of the things I would challenge people is what is one thing they could do going forward to sort of ease decision fatigue? And then just for next week, we're going to be talking about the challenge of managing sort of former peers, and how do you actually earn respect without being sort of overly controlling. And so join us at our Leadership in Action next week. And thank you very much today. And thanks, Sherry, for a great conversation around decision fatigue and some of the challenges.
Yeah.